You're standing at the edge of a homestead garden in the Appalachian foothills. 1880. Beans and squash on one side, but here by the kitchen door is a second garden almost nobody plants anymore. Feverfew, yarrow, calendula, peppermint, a patch of plants that cost this family nothing, that came back every single spring on their own, and that handled the everyday aches and scrapes and fevers of frontier life when the nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away. It cost about $1 in seed once, and it fed the family's medicine chest for 100 years. And by the middle of the 20th century, an industry worth hundreds of billions had every reason to make sure you'd reach for a bottle instead of the backyard. And in the decades after 1910, they made sure you'd never think to grow it. After the last video, a flood of you asked the same thing. Food and soap? Fine. But what did they do when somebody got sick? There was no pharmacy. So, I went through old USTA Farmers' Bulletins, the history of American medicine and modern pharmacology, to give you the honest answer. Not miracle cures. I'm going to be straight with you about what these plants can and can't do, but the real story of the dooryard herb garden every family once kept, why it vanished, and what's actually backed by science today. Stay with me, because the most important thing I'll say in this whole video is a warning, and it comes near the end. Here's the fact that reframes everything. Roughly a quarter of all modern prescription drugs are derived, directly or indirectly, from plants. That's not folklore. That's the pharmaceutical industry's own foundation. Look at the most famous example. Willow bark had been chewed for pain and fever for thousands of years. Hippocrates wrote about it around 400 BC. In the 1820s and 30s, chemists isolated the active compound, salicin. In 1897, a chemist at the Bayer Company refined it into acetylsalicylic acid. You know it as aspirin, one of the most used drugs on earth, and it started as a tree the pioneers already knew to reach for. The pattern repeats over and over. The foxglove plant gave us digoxin, still used for the heart. The opium poppy gave us morphine. A humble mold gave us penicillin. Quinine from cinchona bark treated malaria for centuries. The point is simple and verifiable. The plants in that dooryard garden were not superstition. They contained real, active chemical compounds, and modern medicine was built by isolating and standardizing exactly those compounds. Here's the honest other half, though, and I won't skip it. The reason science isolates and measures these compounds is that a raw plant gives you an unpredictable dose. The same feverfew leaf can vary wildly in strength. That unpredictability is genuinely dangerous for a serious illness, and it's the real, legitimate reason medicine moved towards standardized pills. So when I tell you the pioneers used these plants, I'm telling you what's true. They worked for minor, everyday complaints, and they were all anyone had. I am not telling you to treat a serious condition with a leaf. Hold both of those facts at once, because the rest of this video depends on it. Now let me show you the garden itself, because it was real, it was widespread, and it was remarkably consistent from farm to farm. Almost every homestead kept what was called a dooryard garden or a physic garden. Herbs planted right by the kitchen door, where a woman could step out and gather what she needed. And the plants repeat across diaries, seed catalogs, and farm records from Maine to Georgia. Peppermint and spearmint for upset stomachs, and that one's well supported. Peppermint oil is studied today for digestive complaints. Chamomile, brewed as a calming tea before bed. Feverfew, whose very name tells you its job, and which modern research has actually studied for migraine prevention with mixed but real results. Yarrow, packed onto cuts to slow bleeding. It's been found to contain compounds that aid clotting, which is why one of its old names was soldier's woundwort. Calendula, pot marigold, salved onto scrapes and chapped skin, and still found in skin ointments today. Garlic and onion, eaten hard at the first sign of a cold. Willow bark for aches and fever. The aspirin of the dooryard. Horehound, boiled into candy for coughs. It's still in old-fashioned cough drops. This isn't tradition for tradition's sake. It's applied botany, refined over a century by people who watched closely which plant helped which complaint, and passed it down because the alternative was nothing at all. They were doing by observation and inheritance, a rough version of what a pharmacologist does in a lab, matching a plant compound to a symptom. And here's the part that matters most. They use these plants for the small stuff, a cough, a scrape, a sour stomach, an aching joint, trouble sleeping. For the big stuff, a burst appendix, pneumonia, a difficult birth, a deep infection. Frontier families died at rates that would horrify us today. The dooryard garden was never a hospital. It was a medicine cabinet for minor ailments. Romanticizing it into more than that is exactly the lie I'm not going to tell you. So if every family grew this, why did it vanish? Why does almost no one keep a physic garden now? And why does the word herbalism make a modern doctor wince? The turning point has a name and a date. The Flexner Report, 1910. Abraham Flexner, funded by the Carnegie Foundation, surveyed every medical school in the United States and Canada and wrote a scathing report. And here's the honest part. A lot of his criticism was fair. Many schools were diploma mills, teaching nonsense, producing dangerous practitioners. The reforms that followed genuinely raised the standard of medicine and saved countless lives. I'm not going to pretend the old anything goes era was some lost golden age. It wasn't, but the Flexner Report did something else too. It standardized American medicine around one model: laboratory science, pharmaceuticals, the kind of training that required expensive labs and big institutional funding. Schools that taught herbalism, homeopathy, and other traditional approaches lost their accreditation and closed. The number of medical schools was cut roughly in half over the following years. The money behind the reforms came from the great industrial foundations, Carnegie and soon Rockefeller, and the medicine they funded was the medicine that aligned with the emerging pharmaceutical industry. Then came the regulatory machinery. The Food and Drug Administration grew through the 20th century, and a key principle took hold. You cannot market a substance as treating or curing a disease without expensive clinical trials proving it. That principle protects you from fraud. It's genuinely good that someone can't sell you snake oil claiming it cures cancer. But it also means a plant that no company can patent, because you can grow it for free, will almost never get the hundreds of millions of dollars in trials needed to make a legal medical claim. Not because it doesn't work, because there's no one with a financial reason to prove it. So the dooryard garden didn't get banned in some dramatic raid. It got something quieter and more permanent. It got left out. Left out of medical schools, left out of pharmacies, left out of the culture. By the time the pharmaceutical industry was selling tens of billions of dollars in products a year, a skill every grandmother once had, knowing which leaf eased which ache, had simply been allowed to fade because no one downtown profited from a plant you grew yourself. Now, if you're thinking this is interesting, but you're not about to replace your doctor with a flower bed, good. You shouldn't. Keep your doctor. Keep your prescriptions. This next part is for you anyway. You don't need land. You don't need to give up modern medicine. You don't need to make a single medical decision based on a YouTube video. And please don't. What I'm offering you is smaller and more honest than a miracle. The ability to grow a handful of genuinely useful plants for the minor, everyday stuff, the way your great-grandmother did, and to actually know what's in the tea you drink and the salve you put on a scrape, a pot of peppermint on a windowsill for an upset stomach, chamomile for a calming cup at night, calendula in a window box to make a simple skin salve, a clump of yarrow in the yard. These are low-risk plants for low-stakes problems, and growing them costs a few dollars in seed and gives you something the pharmacy can't. Independence for the small things and the knowledge itself. But here's the line you do not cross, and I'm going to be blunt because I'd rather lose your click than mislead you. If something is serious, chest pain, a high fever that won't break, a wound that's infected, anything that frightens you, you see a doctor. These plants are for the scrapes and the sniffles. They are not a substitute for medical care. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. I'm going to show you the safe, sensible version. Here's how a careful person grows and uses a starter dooryard garden today. I'll keep it to the lowest risk, best supported plants. Start with 4: peppermint, chamomile, calendula, and yarrow. A packet of seed for each runs $1 or $2. The whole garden is well under $10, and most of these come back year after year. Peppermint is so vigorous it's best kept in a pot so it doesn't take over. Chamomile, calendula, and yarrow are happy in a sunny patch or a window box. None of them needs special soil or skill. These are some of the most forgiving plants you can grow. For use, the 2 simplest preparations are a tea, what herbalists call an infusion, and a salve. For a tea, pour just boiled water over a spoonful of dried leaves or flowers. Cover it so the oils don't escape with the steam. Steep 5 to 10 minutes. Strain. Peppermint tea for a heavy stomach after a big meal. Chamomile in the evening. That's it. That's the same method used for centuries. For a simple skin salve, gently warm dried calendula flowers in a neutral oil, like olive oil, for a couple of hours on the lowest heat. Strain out the flowers and stir the infused oil into a little melted beeswax until it sets soft. You've got a calendula salve for chapped hands and minor scrapes. The same thing sold in health stores for far more than it costs to make. Now the safety rules, because this is where it actually matters. 1. Positively identify any plant before you use it. Many useful plants have toxic lookalikes, so grow from labeled seed. Don't forage blind. 2. Introduce one thing at a time in small amounts because anyone can have an allergy. 3, and this is the big one. If you take any prescription medication, are pregnant, or have a chronic condition, talk to a pharmacist or doctor before using herbs, because real plant compounds can interact with real drugs. That interaction risk is proof these plants are pharmacologically active, which is exactly why you respect them. The full dooryard garden, every plant, what it's traditionally used for, what the actual evidence says, how to grow and prepare each one, and a plain language safety guide for every single one. I put it all together in one place. Links in the description. But stay here, because the next part shows you this knowledge is older than America itself. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Ruth in rural Tennessee, because her approach is exactly the balance I'm describing. Ruth is 58, a retired nurse, which is the part that makes her story worth telling, because she's the last person to fall for nonsense. A few years back, she got frustrated watching her family reach for a $12 bottle of something at the drugstore every time someone had a mild stomachache or couldn't sleep. So she put in a small dooryard garden off her back porch. Mint, chamomile, calendula, lemon balm. Her real numbers, because she's a nurse and she tracks things. She figures the household used to spend somewhere around $150 to $200 a year on over-the-counter odds and ends, antacids, sleep teas, cough drops, skin creams, a good chunk of which she's replaced with things from the garden for the cost of seed and a little time. But here's what she'll tell you in her own words, and it's why I trust her. The savings aren't the point, and she never, ever uses the garden for anything serious. A stomachache, a scrape, a restless night. The garden, chest pain, a real fever, an infection. She's on the phone to a doctor before she's off the porch. She didn't reject medicine. As she puts it, she just stopped paying a premium for the small stuff her grandmother handled from the yard. That's the model, not instead of the doctor, alongside common sense. And here's what tells you this was never a frontier fad. Every culture on Earth, completely independently, built the same kind of garden and reached for the same kinds of plants. Go back to ancient Egypt. The Ebers Papyrus, around 1500 BC, lists hundreds of plant remedies: garlic, juniper, aloe, castor, many for the same minor complaints the pioneers treated. The Egyptians were doing 4,000 years ago exactly what that Appalachian woman did at her kitchen door. In ancient Greece, Hippocrates cataloged willow bark for fever. In the 1st century, a Greek physician named Dioscorides wrote De Materia Medica, describing some 600 plants and their uses, a book that remained the backbone of Western herbal medicine for over 1,500 years. In China, the tradition of herbal medicine stretches back thousands of years and is still practiced alongside modern medicine today. In India, Ayurveda did the same. Medieval European monasteries kept physic gardens. The monks were the pharmacists of their age, growing and recording the same kinds of herbs. And the indigenous peoples of the Americas had perhaps the deepest plant knowledge of all. Willow, echinacea, witch hazel, hundreds of species, knowledge that the European settlers, including the pioneers, learned from directly and folded into their own gardens. Witch hazel, still on pharmacy shelves today, came straight from Native American practice. Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, India, the monasteries. Indigenous America, the frontier homestead. Not one of them shared a textbook, and every single one, faced with the everyday aches of being human, reached for the same answer. Plants, observed carefully, used for the small things passed down. That is not coincidence. It's the simple fact that plants contain real compounds, and humans have always been smart enough to notice. The pharmacy aisle is the descendant of that dooryard garden. It took those same compounds, measured them, made them safe and predictable, and that was a real advance. But it also put a price tag and a patent on what used to grow for free by the kitchen door, and then let the world forget the garden ever existed. The industry didn't lose this knowledge. It simply made sure that when you felt unwell, the only answer you'd been taught to see was a bottle on a shelf. So here's where we land. For 4,000 years, from the Eber's papyrus to your great-grandmother's back step, ordinary people grew their own remedies for the everyday stuff. Then, over the last century, that knowledge was quietly pushed to the margins, not because it was worthless, but because no one could patent a plant you grow yourself. They didn't lose this knowledge, you were just never given it. Now you have a piece of it back. Use it wisely. Grow the easy four. Use them for the small things. Respect that these are active compounds. Check with a pharmacist if you take other medicine. And never, ever let a garden stand between you and a doctor when something is serious. That's not me covering myself. That's the actual pioneer wisdom. They used what they had, and they had no illusions about its limits. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment with your state and tell me this. Did anyone in your family, a grandmother, a great aunt, keep an herb garden by the door, or have a go-to plant for a cold or a cough? I read every one, and those stories are how I find the next thing to dig up. And if you're starting to see how much old, free knowledge got quietly shelved to sell you the packaged version scribe, because next week I'm going somewhere that sounds impossible. The pioneers kept their drinking water safe and clear, without a filter, without chemicals, and without electricity, using nothing but sand, gravel, and a principle that the bottled water industry would rather you never understood. It cost almost nothing. It still works, and the reason it disappeared is a story you need to hear.